This 17-year-old boy can be considered the most powerful problem child in history. He managed to build a nuclear reactor in his backyard. When the police discovered the situation, his mother, afraid of being punished, discreetly threw a large amount of radioactive materials into the common trash. This resulted in about 40,000 people being exposed to radiation, and in the end, she ended up taking her own life due to the guilt she felt. Today, we're going to talk about this tragic American teenage genius, David Hahn. In August 1964, the police in Commerce Township, Michigan, received a phone call reporting that a neighbor's house might be getting robbed. The caller said the thief was about to drive away. The police quickly intercepted the vehicle, and to their surprise, the driver was a 17-year-old boy. Inside the car, there was a pile of strangely wrapped objects. When the police picked up one of the unidentified objects and asked what it was, the boy, with a serious and sincere expression, warned them not to touch it because it contained highly radioactive materials. This boy was David Hahn, and he was only 17 at the time. David was a true chemistry genius. From a very young age, David was interested in dangerous chemical experiments, from which he gained much knowledge and fun. After the age of 14, his exceptional talent in chemistry began to be noticed, and he earned several honors. In 1991, he received a Medal of Excellence in Atomic Energy, which motivated him even more. After that, he developed a growing interest in radioactive materials. At that time, David had two major goals related to chemistry. The first was to collect all the elements of the periodic table, including radioactive materials, and the second was to build a nuclear reactor in a simple way. Specifically, David wanted to create a self-sustaining nuclear fission reactor. This type of reactor did not require rare uranium-235, U-235, but instead more common isotopes such as thorium-232, Th-232, and uranium-238, U-238. When used as fuel, these isotopes could, after the fission process, generate more fuel, thus increasing the available energy. To achieve his dream of changing the world, David posed as a chemistry expert and physics professor. He wrote letters to the United States Department of Energy and other government agencies discussing methods for extracting various elements. Thanks to his specialized knowledge, his suspicious behavior went undetected for a long time. Moreover, he found creative ways to obtain the materials he needed. For example, using false identities, he managed to buy large quantities of old smoke detectors and source elements in small amounts from camping lanterns. David spared no effort to obtain the necessary materials. He extracted radium from gun sights and dismantled old watches to obtain tritium. He even destroyed a battery worth $1,000 to obtain a specific element he desired. These irresponsible actions set the stage for the nuclear experiments he would conduct without proper protection. Eventually, David believed he had all the materials he needed. Using a lead block as a base, he attempted to build a breeder nuclear reactor. However, due to the lack of crucial steps and devices to control the nuclear reaction, the reactor he wanted to build failed, and the reaction process went out of control. It was at this point that David's Geiger counter detected an anomaly. The radiation in the environment was extremely high. It turned out that, unintentionally, David had created a neutron source, which is a radioactive object capable of releasing neutrons. Shocked by the discovery, David quickly dismantled the experimental equipment. He put some of the materials in the car and left, hoping to get rid of them somewhere. It was during this attempt to dispose of the materials that David's hurried behavior made a neighbor think he was stealing something, leading them to call the police. When the police arrived, and David warned them about the radioactive nature of the items in his car, they took him, along with the car, to the station. There, using specialized equipment, they measured the radiation of the materials. To the officer's surprise, the radiation from these materials was 1,000 times higher than normal background radiation. The police immediately notified the FBI, suspecting that David might have been trying to build an atomic bomb. The discovery that a 17-year-old high school student had created a neutron source was a shock to the FBI, which then asked the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission to investigate David. However, fearing that his house would be seized, David concealed the existence of his experimental laboratory. As a result, in the months following the discovery, the radiation sources remained in the backyard of his mother's house, continuing to pose a danger. In November of that year, 3 months after the reactor incident, David finally revealed the location of his laboratory. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency declared the site a radioactive risk area and removed all equipment, burying it in the Utah desert. In June of the following year, after dealing with the radiation sources, the Environmental Protection Agency wanted to conduct a medical radiation exposure assessment of David, as he used minimal protection during his experiments. However, for some reason, David firmly refused the assessment and also did not want to have a health checkup. Scientists from the Environmental Protection Agency believed that David would likely have his life expectancy significantly reduced due to radiation exposure. Worse still, during the investigation, the officers informed David and his mother that the decision to demolish the house would depend on the level of radiation. Worried that her house might be demolished, David's mother, before the evaluation began, removed most of the lab items and threw them into common trash without any proper treatment. This fact went unnoticed until the end of the investigation. However, during the investigation, David's mother seemed to gradually realize that the dispersion of radiation could cause serious harm. The items she discarded spread throughout the town, exposing the 40,000 residents of Commerce Township to the danger of radiation. Perhaps it was this immense feeling of guilt that led David's mother to commit suicide in early 1996. Around the same time, David also ended his relationship with his girlfriend. These two events were a major blow to David, leading him into deep depression and addiction to alcohol and drugs. On September 27, 2016, David accidentally died at age 39 due to an overdose caused by the combination of alcohol and painkillers. David Hahn was born in 1976. His mother suffered from depression and schizophrenia. When David was 9 years old, his mother left the psychiatric hospital and his parents divorced. After that, his father remarried, and David went to live with his father. David's grandfather, who was a chemistry enthusiast, gave him a book of chemical experiments, which sparked David's great interest in chemistry. He practically became self-taught, learning to make his own fireworks and homemade rockets, modifying their compositions based on what he learned. However, the consequences of David's actions were always a problem. In one of his experiments, he managed to make chloroform, which has anesthetic effects. Driven by curiosity, he inhaled a large amount and ended up passing out for more than an hour. Over time, David's experiments became increasingly dangerous. On one occasion, he nearly blew up his room. His father forbade him from doing experiments at home, so David set up a small makeshift lab at his mother's house. But David's enthusiasm for experiments did not wane. The satisfaction he got from chemical experiments was already his only joy. Thus, after the reactor accident, David faced a series of blows. His lab was dismantled, he broke up with his girlfriend, and his mother died. This triggered a series of severe problems, including deep depression. Although his father and stepmother encouraged him to enlist in the military, a few years later, his health began to deteriorate and he had to leave military service. Having nothing to do, David returned to his only hobby. He began collecting elements again, trying to complete the dream he could not achieve at 17. In April 2007, the FBI received a report that David was hiding a second neutron source in his refrigerator. FBI agents called David to ask, and he firmly denied it. But as a precaution, the investigators asked David to come to the FBI headquarters for an interview. During the interview, David constantly dodged questions talking about books and movies, and even presented a medical report confirming that he had paranoid schizophrenia. The investigators also interviewed people close to David, who revealed that he was using many illicit drugs and had stopped taking his medication for the mental illness without authorization. David was convinced that some people around him were trying to harm him. Despite his poor mental state, this chemistry genius was still collecting radium and had not given up on building a real nuclear reactor. In August 2007, David dismantled several smoke detectors from his building to extract americium. After the building administrators found out, they called the police, and David was sentenced to 90 days in prison. At the time, David had a face full of sores, looked disoriented, and was in poor health, which further alarmed authorities about his condition and the possible implications of his actions.